Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Rizqi Nadzari. My ID number T2090 60 and 59. Okay, I'm going to the present about Jackobson, Nida, Newmark, and the Koller theory. For the first, Jackobson. Jackobson then moved on to consider the thorny problem of equivalent in meaning between words in different language part of cerebral. He points out that there is ordinarily no full equivalent between code units. Thus, the Russian is here not identical to the English cheese, or for the matter, and the Spanish queso, the German is case, and the Korean is chichu. In extra science, the Russian code unit does not include the concept of soft white curd cheese, known in English cottage cheese. In Russian, that will be tvaroग and not sir. This general principle of interlinguistic difference between term and semantic field importantly also has to do with a basic issue of language and translation. On the one hand, linguistic universalism considers that although language might differ in the way the convey meaning and in the surface realization of the meaning, there is a more or less shared way of thinking and experiencing the world. On the one hand, linguistic relativity or determinism in it is stronger from claim that different in language shape different conceptualization of the world. This is the famous Sapir-Whorf hypothesis that had its root in the Behaviorism of the 1920 and in the anthropological study of the Native American Hopi language, which, according to Wolf, had not word or grammatical category to indicate time. Another claim that is often made is the Eskimos have more word for snow because they perceive or conceive of the differently. This claim in that linguistic determinism is firmly rejected amongst others by Pinker, who point out the vocabulary of a language simply reflects what speaker need for everyday life. The absence of a word in language does not mean the concept cannot be perceived. Someone from hot climate can be so slush and snow can notice the difference. And for Jacobson, cross-linguistic difference, which underline the concept of equivalence, center around obligatory grammatical and lexical form. Language differ essential in what they must convey and not in what they might convey. Example of difference are not easy to find. They occur at the level of gender. Horse is feminine in Romance language, neither in German and English. Honey is masculine in French. German and Italian, feminine in Spanish. Neuter in English and extra. The level of aspect. In Russian, the verb morphology varies according to whether the action has been complete or not. The level of semantic field, such as kinship term and German Geschwister, is normally expressed in English as brother and sister, and since sibling is read normal. Literally meaning elder brother, younger brother, elder sister, younger sister. To Nida and the science of translating. Eugen Nida's theory of translation developed from this own practical work from the 1940 onward when he was translating on organizing the translation of the Bible. Training often experienced translator who work in the field Nida theory to concrete form into major work in the 1960 toward a science of translating and the co-thread the theory and practice and of translation. The title of the book is significant in the attempt to move Bible translation into a more scientific era by incorporating recent work in linguistics. His more systematic approach borrows theoretical concept and terminology both from semantic and pragmatic and from norm. Chomsky worked on syntactic structure, which form the theory of universal generative transformational grammar. These are defined by Nida as follow. Number one, formal equivalent. Formal equivalent focus attention on the message itself. In both form and content, one is concerned the message in the receptor language should match as closely as possible the different element in the source language. And number two, dynamic equivalent. Dynamic letter functional equivalent is based on the what Nida call the principle of equivalent effect, where the relationship between receptor and message should be substantially the same as that which excited between the original receptor and the message. Interesting that debate continue into the 1990 and in 1992 and 1993. For example, Meta, one of the leading international journal of translation study, published a series of 5 papers by Qian Hu, whose express aim was to demonstrate the implausibility of equivalent response. The focus in the paper is not notably on the impossibility of achieving equivalent effect when meaning is bound up in form. For example, the effect of word order in Chinese and English, especially in literary work. Also, the closest natural equivalent might stand in a contradictory relation with dynamic equivalent. And number three, Peter Newmark. Peter Newmark approach to translation and a textbook of translation have been widely used on translator training course and combining a will of practical example of linguistic theory of meaning with practical application for translation. Yet Newmark depart from Nida, except Torironic line he feel that the success of equivalent effect is illusory and that the conflict of loyalty, the gap between emphasis and search and target language, will always remain as the overriding problem in translation theory and practice. Newmark suggests narrowing the gap by replacing the old term with those of semantic and communicative translation. A communicative translation attempt to produce on its reader an effect as close as possible to the obtained on the reader of the original. Semantic origin translation attempt to render as closely as the semantic and syntactic structure of the second language allow the exact contextually meaning of the original. Now, term semantic translation and communicative translation have generally received far less discussion than neither formal and dynamic equivalent. This might be because, despite numerous relevant critiques of equivalent effect, they raise some of the same point concerning the translation process and the importance of the teacher reader. One of the difficult encountered by translation study in systematically following up advanced in theory might indeed be partly attributable to the overabundance of terminology. Newmark himself, for instance, defined Julian Howe's pair of over and cover translation in terms his own semantic and communicative translation, and consider communicative translation to be identical to Nida functional or dynamic equivalence. Number 4 is Koller theory. Nida's move toward a science of translation proved to be especially influential in German, where the common term for translation study. Among the most prominent German scholars in the translation science field during the 1970 and 1980 were Wolfgang of Saarland University and from the then German Democratic Republic de Leipzig School, including Otto Kate and Albert Neu. Important work to refine the concept of equivalence was carried out by Werner Koller in Heidelberg, West German, and Bergen, Norway. Koller. Koller in To the Science of Translation examine the concept of equivalence more closely, along with its link term correspondence. The first correspondence falls off within the field of contrastive linguistics, which compares two language systems and describes differences and similarities. Conservatively, its parameters are those of socialist language. This would include the identification of falsified German actually mean current and not English actual, and of science of lexical, morphological, and syntactic and interferency. Number 2, equivalence. On the other hand, relates to equivalent item in specific ST and TT, pair and context. The parameter is that of socialist rule. That following two examples show specific equivalent of actual in real text. Actual seen 7 based online. There are currently 7 guests online where this information should actual we mostly zuhalten. We shall try to keep this information up to date. In an attempt to answer the question, she also Koller differentiates 5 types of equivalent relation constrained in what is known as double link by the ST on the one hand and by the communicative condition of the receiver on the other. These equivalent types are listed below. Number 1, denotative equivalent relate to equivalence of the extralinguistic content of a text. Other literature, say Koller, call this content invariance. Number 2, connotative equivalence relate to lexical choice, especially but when near synonym. Koller consider this type of equivalent to be referred to by others as strictly equivalent. Number 3, text normative equivalence relates to text types with different kind of text behaving in different way. This is closely linked to work by Katharina Reis. Number 4, pragmatic equivalent or communicative equivalent is oriented toward the receiver of the next hour music, that is Nida dynamic equivalence. Number 5, formal equivalence, which relate to the form and aesthetic of the text, include wordplay and the individually stylistic feature of the city It is effective to buy order as expressive equivalence and should not be confused with neither term formally equivalence. Okay, maybe just it for me. Thank you.